You stop in the glare. How many walls were obstructing the distance? The ghosts were moving in the darkness upon the roofs. Under the light of strange lamps, the glare of shrines extends into the growing gloom. Minarets become trees. The dome becomes a mace. A royal scene, end of July, Al-Qadamiyah. The women are weaving the road's thread, and the masses are moving toward the end, toward the end. The city is motionless, the night that accumulates in thin layers, and the rose is absent in the night's growth. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming today. My name is Roy Scranton, and I'm an associate professor of English and creative writing here at the University of Notre Dame, and also the director of the creative writing program and director of the Environmental Humanities Initiative. Today's event, Aftermaths to the Invasion of Iraq in the Present, is this third in a series of conversations about the Iraq War. These events are the final keynote events for this year's Notre Dame Forum on War and Peace. Since Father Jenkins established the Notre Dame Forum in 2005, each year Notre Dame has invited a campus-wide dialogue about an issue of importance to the university, the nation, and the world. This year's forum discussion has been robust, multifaceted, and, we hope, thought-provoking. In the fall, the campus community gathered in Notre Dame Stadium to hear Emmy Award-winning actors and visiting students from Ukrainian Catholic University deliver a dramatic reading of an excerpt from an ancient Greek tragedy, Aeschylus's The Suppliants, which became the springboard for a conversation about the impact of war in modern times. And our consideration of these themes continued during the spring semester with, among other events sponsored by departments across campus, a film series, a prayer service on the one-year anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine, and a lecture by Cardinal Robert McElroy on the just war doctrine in the Catholic tradition, the power of nonviolent resistance, and the primacy of individual conscience. We gathered here yesterday and continue today to reflect on the war in Iraq and mark the 20th anniversary of the U.S. invasion of that country. Our panel yesterday discussed the invasion in historical context. Our reading today is more concerned with how that event, now historical, lives on in the present. The poem with which I began, An Evening in Al-Qadamiyah City, is by the Iraqi poet Nasir Hassan, from his book Day Places, translated by John Davis. Nasir is the author of several books and an active translator himself, and I got to meet him in 2014 when I was in Baghdad writing a story for Rolling Stone. Nasir was one of the first Iraqis I talked to on that trip, and what he had to say was eloquent, compelling, troubling, and confounding. He had celebrated the invasion when it happened and Saddam's fall, not least because he had himself been imprisoned by the regime, but had grown pessimistic in the following years as liberation turned into catastrophe. When I talked to him in 2014, ISIS was setting off bombs every day, and there was fighting in the country. And I asked him if he still had any hope at all for Iraq, and he told me no. He said, "Hopelessness is the limit and beginning of a new kind of hope. You have to keep going, not to achieve dreams of beautiful mountaintop forests, but because life is more powerful than death. Hopelessness," he said, "makes possible new hope, a faith in the basic tissue of life that is stronger than any disaster." This kind of resilience, sometimes grim, sometimes joyful, sometimes tinged with macabre humor, was something I came to see again and again in the Iraqis I talked to on that trip. And what Nasir said has stayed with me, become part of me, and informs my idea of literature and what it can do. The poets and writers and artists we've invited here today show such resilience in their work that doesn't redeem or recuperate or beautify war and suffering, but which transcends it without diminishing it or forgetting. I had this complicated plan. I was going to read tiny excerpts of each author's work and then read their introductions as I went. But I realized on reflection that would just be more me talking up here. And I want to cede this space to our writers. So I'm going to introduce our writers and then get out of the way. So I'll introduce them in the order that they will speak. They will read from your right to your left. Donia Mikhail, at the end there, is an Iraqi-American poet, novelist, and writer. She is a laureate of the UNESCO Sharjah Prize for Arab Culture and has received fellowships from the United States Artists, the Guggenheim, and Kresge. Her honors also include the Arab American Book Award and the UN Human Rights Award for Freedom of Writing. After graduating from the University of Baghdad, she worked as a journalist and translator for the Baghdad Observer. Facing censorship and interrogation, she left Iraq in 1995, first to Jordan and then to America, settling in Detroit. She earned a master's degree from Wayne State University and currently teaches Arabic at Oakland University in Michigan. She is the author of many books, including The Iraqi Nights, The Beekeeper, and The Bird Tattoo. Next in is, let me find the right, where am I at here? There we go. Next in is Mortada Ghazar, an Iraqi novelist, filmmaker, and visual artist. Born in Kuwait in 1982, he has an engineering degree from the University of Baghdad and has been a resident at the Iowa International Writers Workshop. He has written, directed, and produced several films that have screened at international festivals. His animated short film, Language, won the Doha Film Award. He's the author of 3 novels, Broom of Paradise, Sayyid Asghar Akbar, and My Beautiful Cult, as well as the memoir, I'm in Seattle, Where Are You? Next in is Salar Abdo. Salar Abdo is an Iranian novelist and essayist. He's the author of the novels Out of Mesopotamia, The Poet Game, Opium, and Tehran at Twilight, and the editor and translator of the anthology Tehran Noir. He is also a director of the director of the graduate program in creative writing at the City College of New York. His novel Out of Mesopotamia, I will add, is based in part on his reporting from the 2014 to 2017 complex of wars around Iraq and Syria involving ISIS. Next up is Amal Al-Jabouri. Amal Al-Jabouri is an Iraqi writer, poet, translator, journalist, and publisher. She published her first collection of poems, Wine from Wounds, at the age of 19. After studying English literature at the University of Baghdad, she worked as a journalist and translator and founded East West Publishing, whose mission is to introduce works of international literature to the Iraqi literary scene. In 1997, seeking political asylum, Al-Jabouri immigrated to Germany, where she launched Al-Diwan, the first and only Arab-German literary magazine. Al-Jabouri is the author of 7 collections, translated into 12 languages, and has published 14 books. Her book, 99 Veils, received the award for Best Arabic from the Paris Arabic Literature Society, and you can also find her book, Hagar Before the Occupation, Hagar After the Occupation, in translation. Finally, there, right? Our moderator, Atalia Omer, is a professor of religion, conflict, and peace studies in the Keough School of Global Affairs at the University of Notre Dame. She's a core faculty member of the Keough School's Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies. She earned her PhD in religion, ethics, and politics from the Committee on the Study of Religion at Harvard University. Her research focuses on religion, violence, and peace building, as well as theories and methods of the study of religion and Palestine, Israel. She's the author of When Peace is Not Enough, How the Israeli Peace Camp Thinks About Religion, Nationalism, and Justice, and co-authored Religious Nationalism, a reference handbook, and co-edited the Oxford Handbook of Religion, Conflict, and Peace Building. She was a 2017 Andrew Carnegie Fellow, resulting in her forthcoming book, Decolonizing Religion and Peacebuilding. I'm grateful, extremely grateful, to Father Jenkins for his support for this event, as well as to the 2022-2023 Notre Dame Forum Advisory Committee, the staff and the President's Office who did the heavy lifting, including Ann Firth, Carol Mullaney, Hannah Heinzecker, and especially Heather Asiala, who's been on point and ahead of the curve at every step. And I'm also grateful to everyone else involved, from the staff serving the food to our writers, to ND Studios for live streaming and recording the event, and to all of you who came here today. And I'm also grateful to Atalia Omer, who will be moderating the conversation. The order of events will be that each writer will read for about 10 minutes, either from their seat or from the podium. And then with one minor swerve, Amal Al-Jabouri will be reading her poems in Arabic, and following that, Atalia Omer will read those poems again in English. Following the reading, Amalia will moderate a discussion and Q&A, and following that, we hope you might continue the conversation in the lobby, where we will have some box lunches to stay or to go, and there are books for sale. Some of the standing tables for lunch will be set aside for those observing Ramadan Mubarak. So if you do choose to eat here after the reading, please leave those tables aside for the observant. I think that's enough, unless I've forgotten anything. Heather, okay. Please join me in welcoming all of our writers here today. But first of all, our leader, the first one off here, Dunya Mikhail.
Good afternoon. Maybe if you keep this on, it's easier, because it's easier for me to use this maybe than this is kind of, I'm short. Yeah. Thank you, Roy, for the introduction and everything. Thank you all for coming. I'm honored to be here with you at Notre Dame University. I will read some poems. The first one is titled A Second Life. When I wrote it, I was thinking, we Iraqis, we saw all this, what we saw, we really need a second life. But then I thought maybe everybody needs a second life. After this life, we'll need a second life to apply what we learned in the first. We make one mistake after another and need a second life to forget. We hum endlessly as we wait for the departed. We need a second life for the whole song. We go to war and do everything Simon says. We need a second life for love alone. We need time to serve out our prison terms so we can live free in our second life. We write poetry and pass away and need a second life to know the critics' opinions. We rush around all over the place and need a second life to stop and take pictures. Suffering takes time. We need a second life to learn to live without pain. That one was translated by Karim James Abu Zaid, and this second one was translated by Elizabeth Winslow, thanks to my translators. The Plane. This was written after this, shortly after the invasion. Sorry. The plane. Sorry, did I do something? Oh, no, it's okay. The plane. The plane arriving from Baghdad carries American soldiers. It rises above the moon, reflected on the Tigris, above clouds piled like corpses, and an ancient harp, and the beaten breasts, and the ones who were kidnapped. It rises above the destruction that grows with the children, and the long lines at the passport office, and Pandora's open box. The plane and its exhausted passengers will land 6,000 miles away from an amputated finger lying in the sand. the artist child, this kind of conversation between a child and an adult. I want to draw the sky. Draw it, my darling. I have. And why do you spread the colors this way? Because the sky has no edges. I want to draw the earth. Draw it, my darling. I have. And who is this? She is my friend. And where is the earth? In her handbag. I want to draw the moon. Draw it, my darling. I can't. Why? The waves shatter it continuously. I want to draw paradise. Draw it, my darling. I have, but I don't see any colors. It is colorless. I want to draw the war. Draw it, my darling. I have. And what is this circle? Guess. A drop of blood? No. A bullet? No. Then what? The button that turns off the lights. This one I read, Eva is a real character. It's based on a real character, a real story. Eva, whose shadow is a swan. The day we met in Babylon, for me to interpret her, Eva found a pocket stone she'd later add to her collection of stones from different cities she kept in a glass bowl. We strolled roadsides piled with rocks blasted from bridges and buildings, now bent and cratered. Yet I like to think that stone might have predated the fall of Babylon when people spoke one language. I liked Eva's musical tone. She said, I'm from Stockholm, home to no war for 200 years. I'm from Baghdad, I replied, a city we call the home of peace, though war has lived in it for 200 years. We exchanged postcards for 30 years before my East and her West met in London, our friendship needing no umbrellas in the rain. I waited for her impatiently, but hid on a whim behind a pillar, admiring her poise as she approached and scanned the passers-by like Noah in search of the ark. A woman nearly 90, so beautiful, her shadow a swan, a goddess who found her lost universe in the last minute. She hiked an island mountain on the way to our meeting and bought a CD of fairy music for me. When I followed up with a farewell call, I learned she'd lost her hearing. Right, so I can hear you. She must have read my lips. The concert we attended in the rain must have seemed like lightning without thunder. When I receive her postcard, I can't read her handwriting, but plan to search the dictionary of Babylon for her words and decipher the line drawn by time. Couple more poems. This one was probably the first one I wrote when I came to America. I was in a hurry. Yesterday, I lost a country. I was in a hurry, and I didn't notice when it fell from me like a broken branch from a forgetful tree. Please, if anyone passes by and stumbles across it, perhaps in a suitcase open to the sky, or engraved on a rock like a gaping wound, or wrapped in the blankets of immigrants, or canceled like a losing lottery ticket, or helplessly forgotten in purgatory, or rising with the smoke of war, or stolen in Ali Baba's jar, or disguised in the uniform of a policeman who stirred up the prisoners and fled, or squatting in the mind of a woman who tries to smile, or scattered like the dreams of new immigrants in America. If anyone stumbles across it, return it to me, please. It's my country. I was in a hurry when I lost it yesterday. I'll end with this poem. I read just the first stanza in Arabic for, the flavor of the language, and then I'll switch to the translation. الحرب تعمل بجد. كم هي مجدة الحرب ونشطة وبارعة، منذ الصباح الباكر توقظ صفارات الإنذار، تبعث سيارات إسعاف إلى مختلف الأمكنة، تؤرجح جثثا في الهواء، تزحلق نقالات إلى الجرحى، تستدعي مطرا من عيون الأمهات. The war works hard. How magnificent the war is, how eager and efficient. Early in the morning, it wakes up the sirens and dispatches ambulances to various places, swings corpses through the air, rolls stretchers to the wounded, summons rain from the eyes of mothers, digs into the earth, dislodging many things from under the ruins. Some are lifeless and glistening, others are pale and still throbbing. It produces the most questions in the minds of children, entertains the gods by shooting fireworks and missiles into the sky, sows mines in the fields, and reaps punctures and blisters, urges families to immigrate. The war continues working day and night. It inspires tyrants to deliver long speeches, awards medals to generals, and themes to poets. It contributes to the industry of artificial limbs, provides food for flies, adds pages to the history books, achieves equality between killer and killed, teaches lovers to write letters, accustoms young women to waiting, fills the newspapers with articles and pictures, builds new houses for the orphans, invigorates the coffin makers, gives grave diggers a pat on the back, and paints a smile on the leader's face. The war works with unparalleled diligence, yet no one gives it a word of praise. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. So I'm gonna read a short story. Hopefully it's not gonna take more than 7 or 8 minutes. The story title is The Helmet House. So just in case you throw off due to my accent, the story is about a retired teacher who unexpectedly reunites with his students from long ago. And the story is by his voice, so just in case he says something inappropriate, so it's him, not me. Well, not very him, but anyway. The Helmet House. Sometimes I consider purchasing a mask, not for myself, but for the city. A mask that would prevent the city from seeing me and perhaps help me forget and the city to not remember. As a retired teacher who served for 40 years, I occasionally run into former students during their walks with loved ones, be it their wives, kids, or even grandchildren. Although they greet me with smiles and kind words, showing executive respect and reverence, I was never close to my pupils. I always kept that in mind. Worry of the day when they would confront me with angry, vengeful expressions. The education system has changed drastically since my time, and it's now illegal to physically punch students. Violators could face charge, including dismissal, imprisonment, or fines. The children I taught have grown up, and that thought of them still makes me fearful every day. I have never felt as ashamed as I do now in my 77-year 77 is a phrase commonly used in my Bible dialect to exaggerate. Someone may say, I called you 77 times but got no answer. It's a formula of exaggeration, and it makes me feel as though I have lived an exaggerated life. Today, I ran into him. Fortuitously, our paths crossed, and there he was, the same long-tongued student I recalled from years ago, now a taxi driver. His yellow vehicle appeared as tiny as a matchbox, and despite a heavy mustache that obscured his face, he hadn't changed much. His body was still tiny, and his eyes sinking, giving him a suspicious look. It all came back to me now. It happened a year and a half after the war, when the principal used to send me the naughty students who didn't prepare for their lessons or do their homework. My office was located near the restroom without a door, more like a horizontal pit where little sinner would fall, groaning and crying out for their mothers. In my office, no one cried out for their fathers. Fathers, in most cases, were imaginary beings, only existing in wooden framed images on the walls, where the faces of martyrs stared into nothing. My office was infamous among all the students for its stinky air, which remained entrenched in their noses even after they graduated, got married, and reproduced. As for me, I could never forget that one particular student and his younger brother. They stood in front of my office, ready to face punishment at the hands of the principal's assistants, the designated instrument of discipline in the school. I motioned for them to enter and close the door, or rather, the imaginary entrance to my horizontal pit of sin. As expected, the students usually responded with tears and claiming that the room had no door. I would then force them to close the non-extended door and begin the punishment with a swift smash on their heads. As the two students entered my office, the older brother dragged his younger sibling, who mimicked the act of closing a door by pushing the air with his palm. According to the principal's report, these two hooligans had handed in blank homework, claiming it was complete and perfect. But their notebooks were entirely empty for the whole semester. What bad rising and looseness, the principal had written. After 15 minutes of punishment with my trusty bamboo stick, the older brother confessed to me that they had indeed completed the homework, but it never appeared on paper. We did it with our father at midnight, a few minutes before dawn, he said. He woke us up, took off his helmet, and helped us solve the problematic homework. Our mother observed us from a distance and cried. She couldn't see him as we did, and she couldn't see the homework either. But we definitely saw him. When we woke up in the morning, our father was gone, and so was the homework. Only the helmet remained on the pillow. The younger brother chimed in. And about the door, we can close it for you. We learned from our mom, who always prays and talked to no one, saying we became doorless after you. Honestly, my brother and I can close doors you can't see. As I sat As I sat in the backseat of his taxi, I gazed at the silhouette of the older student who drove me through the dark and winding roads of the city. Though years has passed since our last encounter, he did not recognize me, or perhaps he did, stealing glances at me 2 or 3 times. After reaching my destination, I handed him the fare, and he thanked me kindly, wishing me a safe and happy night. As I alighted from the car, I gently shut the door with utmost care, as if it were made of glass, or perhaps as if it never existed at all. Thank you.
Can I just sit here? Yeah. Oh, okay. Hi. A couple of years ago, an old soldier friend of mine called me from the city of Mashhad near the Afghanistan border and asked me what I was up to. I was in Tehran then, where I lived much of the time. And I told him I was writing a story about men who come back from war and don't know what to do with themselves. He said, "Salar, you're writing about my life." Now, this gentleman was mostly an Iranian Afghanistan operative. But the book that I had just completed and which Roy was good enough to read before publication and generously blurb was about Iraq. And Iraq at a very specific moment. The Americans had packed up and gone. ISIS or Daesh had swooped in via Syria and taken enormous swaths of Iraq. And the Iranians, under the overall command of Haj Qasem Soleimani, whom the Americans would eventually assassinate in Baghdad years later, were there to do what Iranians usually do, for better or worse, depending on whom one talks to. I found myself embedded off and on among this lot for the next few years, and the absurdities of my situation being so thorough, I realized I hadn't the ability to write a nonfiction book about it, so I wrote a book of fiction, based mostly on a collective set of experiences. Peace is beauty and necessary, but during these years, I was struck by how men are in fact often attracted by war and even attracted to dying. It became an obsession, which in turn made it very difficult to return to places where there was no war. I had to question my own motives and of those around me. These few pages then are a setup of the beginning of the book out of Mesopotamia. In this opening scenario, the Iranians have put together and joined the Shia forces in Iraq, but also in Syria. And in doing so, they are as well using battle-hardened Afghan Shiite warriors that they have trained. It's a sort of free-for-all of everybody against everybody in that bizarre theater of war that became Iraq once America had mostly, but not entirely, done its song and dance. So I'll read a little bit of that. Together, Nassif and I made a questionable night watch, but those specters I was sure were out there, digital contours inside Nassif's neck-breaking night vision gadget in the vast Syrian blackness. I had only seen them in daytime as body parts or dead. At nights, I'd hear them. Until now, I had done everything to come farther west, begged mostly, because I wanted to report on the fight at its fiercest. But my half-blindness made me a liability, not a huge one, because honestly, this war was on the side of clumsy. And now I just wanted to go back east again, back to Iraq, where it was safe. This safeness was relative. It only meant that over there, you knew who your enemy was. Here in Syria, it was different. Here lurked true evil. I sat back. Nassif, who had been ghostly silent for the last hour, had an affected Afghan accent. Sometimes when we were alone, he would forget and shift into his regular Persian of the northwest of Iran. There was a noticeable difference, yet I didn't bother calling him out on his act. He did it because the Revolutionary Guards, who were in charge of all logistics and combat operations, were not so keen on just any Iranian getting up to come way out there. There had to be some form of control. Our Afghan mercenaries, they could control. There was a command structure, regular military accountability, there were paychecks and leaves. With the Iranians, it was different. Pay for combat was the last thing these guys came here for. Mostly they came here because they wanted martyrdom. I will try to convey what this means, this fucking hunger for martyrdom that grips a man or woman and won't let them go. I will fail entirely at explaining it, of course, because in the end, it's the one thing that is unexplainable. But I'll try anyway, because I have seen it, tasted it from a safe but close enough distance. I figured that Nassif, who had bought himself a counterfeit Afghan identity and practiced the accent to pass muster, was now in his element here in nowhere land, ready to die and have a street or a traffic circle named after him back home. And die he would very soon, yet he would never be graced with the glory of a thoroughfare dedicated in his real name, or even the fake one. Nassif's calculations were wrong. He would not become a celebrated martyr. In the meantime, while he was still alive, I questioned his sanity and my own. The enemy was so close now I could hear them breathe, "God is great," even before they said it. Sometimes you actually hear a man say Allahu Akbar before the utterance. You can feel the fear in him. He's pumping himself up, charging every fiber of his wasted life, knowing the chances that he'll get to you are not very good, because you are almost as determined as he is. Almost. You feel him and hate him. There were men here who said this particular enemy was just misled, deluded. They said, kill them because you have to, but don't hate them. They are, after all, fellow believers who only went astray. But being even-handed is not an easy thing. I hated a lot of things. I hated not being here more than I hated being here. This was a dilemma. But the bigger dilemma was our makeup, ours and the enemy's. They had descended like locusts on this land to establish God's rule, while carrying out suicide attacks on civilians just about everywhere else. They were unforgiving in both pursuits, and they came from every continent. From day one, they possessed a fearsome arsenal that seemed to have materialized out of thin air, and they went by a variety of names. Western news agencies mostly just called them the Islamic State. I'll stick to enemy. Enemy spoke a babble of languages. We, on the other hand, who were there to stop them, mostly just spoke Arabic and Persian. The Afghans among us were formidable warriors, maybe by virtue of how much fighting they had known since the beginning of time. But they were hired hands in the end. They did not get dreamy-eyed about martyrdom like the Iranians did. The Iranians, us, who hired the Afghans for the job and shared the wistful and fragile sounds of Persian with them, did get dreamy-eyed. In fact, there was a degree of dreaminess about the Iranians that sometimes made you think the world would go to sleep one day and simply forget to wake up. We were also hitting outside of our comfort zone. Syria and Iraq were deep Arab lands that may have needed us just then to stop the enemy, but they didn't want us. They didn't love us. Yet we were there equipped with some bullshit reason about protecting the holy sites of Mesopotamia from the desecrations of the common enemy. This made us suspect, even to ourselves. And often I wondered if our pretense was not worse than that of the Americans, who variously dropped bombs on the enemy and on us and put it all down to saving civilization. At least the Americans, for all their bluster and spine-chilling gunships, did not cram belief down anyone's throat. We did, or we tried. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all. Thank you for Roy, for Notre Dame University, for having this opportunity to at least to give voice for voiceless Iraqis and telling you their unheard and untold stories. So I will shorten my reading because I love to read in Arabic, my poems written in Arabic. And in order to have much time for some notes, I'd like to just talk about it. Okay, so starting with Arabic. This book, Hagar Before Occupation, Hagar After the Occupation, translated by my gifted translator, Rebecca Howell. Although translation of English, of poetry as a genre is very, very difficult. أمي بعد الاحتلال مثل كل العجائز اضطربت أمي حتى صارت صلاتها مرهونة بترنيمة الارتباك. لقد سئمنا هذه الديمقراطية. كان الرئيس واحدا، كان الخوف واحدا، كان الحزب واحدا، كانت الحروب واحدة، كان الرعب واحدا. طعم الديمقراطية بات باهتا. لم تعد عيناي قادرتين على التحديق في وعودها، شعاراتها التي ماتت في قلوبنا منذ أمد بعيد.
My mother, after the occupation, was anxious, like all the old women. Even her prayers became a hymn to chaos. We are sick of you, democracy. There used to be one president. There used to be one fear. There used to be one party. All the wars, one terror. Democracy, I lost my taste for you. Your can rotted inside me years ago.
So this book before, poetry before and before the occupation, and poetry after the occupation, every poem before and after. And this does not mean before was paradise and after 2003 was hell. It was from bad to worse. The only, maybe it's very sad poems. Only the exception for a poem which really has hope, football or soccer after the occupation, because after the occupation, when the Iraqi football team, they won the championship during Asian Cup 2007 during the civil war. So Iraqi, they forgot their divisions and everything, and they went to the street with one identity. They cheered Iraqi as Iraqi, not as Sunni or Shia. الشعر بعد الاحتلال is very short. I will also shorten this. It's a long poem in order to have Atalia, she will read it for you in English. الشعر بعد الاحتلال. أصبحت مهانا غير قادر على حمل وحشتي. أصبحت عبئا على موتي، وتحولت نخاسا يبيع ذكرياتي ويغتاب روحي ويدل الغرباء على أوراقي. لا، لست أنت، وكذلك لست أنا. تغير العالم من حولنا، تغيرنا أو كنا كذلك دون أن ندري. لقد توهمتك كل تلك السنين، جمعتني في فمك وشايات لحكايات ناقصة، وجبرت روحي بالصبر وبالانتظار الذي ظل وشمي وأناي. لكنك ضيعت بكارة روحي في أكاذيب وعودك. أكلتني جائعا وصمت خائفة عليك. ما الذي جنيت منك؟ غير حساد دخلوا موسوعة جينيس بأعدادهم وأحقادهم، غير عشاق مغلوبين على مرهم يكذبون ليتسلقوا الطريق إليك.
Poetry after the occupation. Weighted with shame, you became too weak to hold my grief. So heavy my death could not hold you. A slaver trading my memories, beating my papers to strangers. No, not you, and not me either. The world changed around us. Or were we like this the whole time and blind? All these years I thought I knew you. I was wrong. You gathered me into your mouth, a spy speaking half-truth. You plastered my fractured soul with patience until all I knew to do was wait for you. My innocence raped, your promises hollow and looting. You were hungry, so you ate me, while I feared for you and fasted. What have I earned other than enemies who merit a world record in number and malice? Other than lovers seducing me so they can have you? Oh, poetry, oh, sly cheat. Your daughters are whores. You think they can tempt me. And I will return to you, letting my hours like blood. You are the lowest of gods. I won't deny what you once offered me when you were honest, my arbiter of the divine. But you became a wall between deliverance and your God's ear deaf, your word already lost. My family's wails, suicides hidden in your stones. When I left, you were dead, alone, holding nothing but the past, its terror and praise. So I will betray you, just as you betrayed me all those years, a setup to bring me captive. Your cheap cell called poem, your barren prison called poet, your prison, this Abu Ghraib, where all are saddest, the inmates, jailers, the jailers, inmates of your strange promises. Oh, you, father of strangers, my secret religion, now profane, exposing us, unarmed, unable to defend against fate, unable to war against the spoil of our bounty, our paradise. What a waste. I used to walk head in the clouds, thinking maybe peace will reign upon my people. But whenever I came to look for you, you drift. Deserting me to be the sun's hostage. What use do I have for this clarity? I don't want the day. It leads to thirst. It leads only to thirst. I'm the progenitor of stories. I'm pregnant with memory. Tell me, when will night come? I have waited ages for the crescent moon, my oracle, to come before becoming full. I want her to accompany me in my final absence or appearance. It doesn't matter which. No, I don't want the full moon. She will light up the darkness, and I pray for darkness. This is my protest. This is my folly. Defeated, you step down from your horse, silent, a tiger, a paper tiger. You are not the one who will abate my pain. You are not the one who will stretch my womb with a harvest of fruit and dignity. I want to walk tall, and you are a pygmy. You are not fit for Hagar, she who carried God, wounded all this time. You are the devil's sign, a curse on the east, a conscience, a grammar, a stable that I try to castrate. Once you were classical verse, once your people ruled the world, then you broke piece by piece. Free, you shattered, and what was left? This prose, this regret.
Thank you. Thank you. So after 2003, whenever I started trying to understand my own history, I mean Iraqi history, and the more I read English books, which became those books, textbooks, teaching Iraqi history. And I came to the conclusion that Iraqi history, written through the Western, the Eurocentric approach, has been excluded the Iraqi voices. And I am quoting Ella Shohat. Ella Shohat is an Iraqi Jew. She's a professor at, I think, Columbia University. And she was born in Tel Aviv, in Palestine. And she said, our history cannot be written and studied through Western terminology. And to make it very simple, for everybody, for academic people, so nationality or nationalism as a terminology, it has a different connotation if you read it in English, in Iraq or in Arab country, has a very positive connotation. It means when people resist against their occupiers, when they defend their countries. And in the West, in the Western terminology, the connotation is very different. So every time, in a very simplistic way, Iraqi history, modern history, introduced that the oppressor, the Sunni oppressor, they became the oppressed after 2003, and Iraq was governed by a Sunni state. Of course, this is not simple as that, especially after American occupation, the Iraqi archive for Ba'ath Party, and also for the special archive for Saddam Hussein, has been shipped to the United States and digitalized. And thank you for Kanaan Makkiya, the Iraqi scholar, who I disagree with his approach in liberating Iraqi from the dictatorship, but he was the one who facilitated and deposited this archive in Hoover Institute, which became accessible for scholars. And if you read the first book written based on this archive by Professor Joseph Sasson, he is the head of the Middle East Center in Georgetown, Iraq, Saddam. This book is very important book, and I highly recommend you to understand the era, especially the era of the Ba'ath Party rule and Saddam Hussein. So, and he concluded in this book that, according to the archive, the regime was not a sectarian regime. The Ba'ath Party, or the rule, was like a corporate company. So whoever show his loyalty for the president and for the Ba'ath Party, etc., he will become rewarded and protected. And the regime, according to Joseph Sasson, based on this archive, was more secular in terms of dealing and running the country. So I wanted to tell you that there is many stories which is unfortunately untold, and not only untold. During the Ba'ath regime, the storytelling, the art of storytelling was suppressed. And this is also mentioned by Kanaan Makkiya in his book, The Republic of Fear, the great book published in 1989. So after 2003, people started to telling their stories, especially even before social media. And in the West, when you read history, Arab history, Iraqi history, focusing mostly on a negative, and I will give you two examples from different historical era. In 1941, we used to have a Jewish community, and this Iraqi Jewish community was very advanced community and contributed in building the new Iraq in 1921. So when the pogrom happened in 1941, Muslim families, they defended their neighbors, their Jewish neighbors, and they sacrificed even themselves. And this is mentioned by Iraqi Jews in their memoirs. This story, you never, when you read the history of Jews, and because it's presented as a singular history, although it is not a singular history, so you don't find it. After 2014, when ISIS advanced and captured Mosul, everybody knows about the plea of all Iraqis, no matter if they are Yazidi and anyone stand against ISIS, he was persecuted. And Nadia Murad became the Nobel Prize laureate, and nobody heard about the story of her savior, Omar. Omar, who saved 29 girls, Yazidi girls. And when ISIS, they knew, they beheaded him. Omar and his family and his story has been forgotten, and only the story of Nadia and her community is prevailed. And this is why storytelling is so important. And may your story loan courage to your people and to the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Amal and everyone. So I'll just kind of launch us into a conversation. I thought to do it by highlighting a few things that really kind of came to me as I was listening to you and reflecting about all your readings individually, but also together in relation to this moment of supposedly aftermath, but obviously the violence, the injury is ongoing, as we also heard very clearly, just on the level of how the catastrophe of the invasion and American occupation of Iraq continues to live in people's bodies. So as we heard yesterday from Professor Al-Dawachi. So I wanted to highlight a few things that really kind of confronted me as I was listening to you. And I'll start with you, Amal. I mean, I really appreciate that you brought the work and the reflection of Ella Shohat, who is at NYU, Iraqi Jew, and how you contextualize her work as an Iraqi Jew as a way of disrupting the kind of the logic of a single story. So I think this is something that is very, very critical, including the kind of the colonial legacy of creating sectarianism that is an ongoing legacy in the region, in the Middle East, North Africa region, and in other contexts as well. One line from the poetry that I had the privilege and honor of reading the translation of. One line that really kind of captured me is that we are sick of your democracy with a capital D, which of course is very loaded. So I wanted to put it back on the table. With Salar, I kind of the framing of your reading about people returning from the war and not knowing what to do with themselves, and this notion of, and in the reading itself, the excerpt that you read, the point about martyrdom and being, having traffic circles named after you, and how to understand how to understand martyrdom and glorification of war and violence and sacrifice over generations and generations, and how does it unfold, and how this legacy continues to live. And another point that is very critical that was not mentioned yesterday in the discussion is how, I mean, yes, it's like as Roy said, a historic event, but obviously it's ongoing and completely transformed the region. And you focus on Daesh and ISIS. That was, of course, is a product of the invasion and occupation. So again, this is another kind of point that I think that is very urgent to continue to think with and reflect on. And Mortada, one of the things that really grabbed me about from your reading is the fathers in wooden frames, and what does it mean? What does it mean to imagine life and tender ties that people never had a chance to actually inhabit and experience. And Dunya, the one image that really grabbed me is partly because I'm so rooted in the question of Palestine and the occupation of Palestine, and the Nakba, or the catastrophe in Palestine, as something that is ongoing, is the image of, from the last poem that you read, about yesterday I lost my country. I was in a hurry, and everything is contained in a suitcase. And of course, that immediately connected for me with Mahmoud Darwish, really famous, poem about my homeland in a suitcase, and what it signifies and what it has signified for Palestinian people over decades and decades, and technically 75 years. In May, from the Nakba. So this just leads me to a general question about your personal, each one of you, personal relationship to the war as ongoing, to the invasion and occupation of Iraq, but also within a kind of a broader regional frame, if you wish, of the broader region, and its relationship to the United States as empire. And so where do you see the motifs of home, displacement, belonging in your work, in your thinking, and in your own personal kind of trajectory and understanding of who you are and your creative work? So whoever wants to jump in. Yeah, go ahead, Amal.
So you mentioned something about the democracy, right? About the poem. So all of us, we know that democratization project of the American invasion ended up with, I don't want to mention, the list is very long. And liberation or freedom cannot come with invention. This is absolutely, I do believe in it, and I march with Günter Grass and hundreds of thousands of German people in Berlin before the starting of the war, carrying slogan, no for dictatorship and no for war. So this was because as a poet, as a person, as an Iraqi, I had the feeling that the war is not under the myth of bringing democracy or human rights,
regime change.
Because the human rights has already violated Abu Ghraib, the disgraced legacy of Abu Ghraib, the Fallujah. We have many examples. So Arab countries from Morocco to Iraq, if you ask anybody now, and this is not mentioned by me, by the great novelist and thinker from Morocco, Hassan Arwid, priorities for people of Arab world now is good governance, is not democracy. And this is not a step back by the narrative of democracy, that this has been empowered by authoritarian regime in the region in order to stay in power, but this is what people believe. That and I want also to ask the American audience why certain political governance has to be dictated from one country, superpower country like the United States, and to be universal. That this has to be in Iraq, in all Arab countries, and also certain values, why they have to be universal. If you believe in diversity, and we hear a lot about
investing billions of dollars in Iraq and Arab countries, diversity and empowering social cohesion, etc. Although coexistence in Iraq and in the region was the norm. Why if you believe in this diversity and we are different, why certain value has to be universal and impose it either by war, either by sanction? This is what not only Arab world. If you read the book by I think European Belgian thinker, he wrote a book published against election. So in this book against election, and the photo was on the cover for Trump, so that Europeans starting also rethinking even this shape of governance, democracy based on election. So it's not only Iraqis.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, the important point about well, even if the vision was to quote unquote liberation, and democracy and freedom can never be achieved through military invasion. This is very important. Other people want to jump in on.
Isn't in?
Well, whoever wants to.
I don't want to take somebody's turn. We are in order here. I have something to say about what you mentioned, Talia, about personal relation to the war. I was thinking about that. I mean, it's hard to talk about the personal relation with the war because for me, war was living in our house. Believe me, we had a room for it. My mom called the war room. And the reason she called it that way, because she designed it in a way that is suitable for the war. It was a small room under the stairs. The windows were had big tapes so that if when it's bombed, it's not gonna scatter as bad as usual. And there were candles in it. So because usually in one of my poems, I don't know if you remember, I said the child said the war when was drawn was as a button to turn off the light. This came from actual experience, that because every time me and my four brothers, my mother, my father passed, he was young when he passed away, he didn't see the whole thing, but there was a button on the room to turn off the light when there were siren. That was my task. I had to turn off the light first thing. When it's siren, when I hear the siren, that's why for me always the image is that button to turn off the light is the war. But then, and she didn't allow us, my mom didn't allow us to go to the bathroom or anything because she wanted us to live or die together there in that small room. So I'm afraid it's too familiar to us, to the Iraqis, the war. Every time I open my eyes to the war, like maybe my colleagues here, every time the war had different name, the Iraq-Iran war, the Desert Storm, the Desert Fox, invasion of Iraq, every time economic sanctions, every time it comes in different name, but it was same. For me, I knew it very well, despite I don't care what was the name of it, it was that familiar being that survived with us. The war survived with us. Yeah. So, and I don't want to take all the time. It's going to be endless. I talk about the war, so let me start.
Thank you.
Just want to start with what she just ended. Also, from Iraqi perspective, during 90s and even during the Saddam regime, there were names for every war, but there was like Iraqi version of it, and it's all funny and interesting.
Mother of all battles.
Yeah, mother of all battles. It's interesting. Yeah. Hawasim, yeah. I don't know how to translate Hawasim, like the end of, yeah. Anyway, yesterday I was writing something for my half weekly column. Also, it's for Iraqi readers. I wanted to start about something that was very interesting to me, that the four American presidents, like George Bush, Obama, then Trump, then Joe Biden, each of them they spell or pronounce Iraq in a different way.
Iraq.
I know this has maybe scientific or some reason, some like specific reason because of they have different accent, but I figured out they are literally don't know how to pronounce Iraq in one way. So there's no reference we can come back. This is just a sign about how people here, since I live here since 7 years, and it's always interesting how people, people here like talking about backgrounds and identities and colors, those American conversation now. And they want to understand me from this perspective. So I have to fit in one of their categories.
Yeah.
And it's something new for my generation. I'm not saying it's bad or good, but just descriptive. So I remember, and most people trying to be nice because they are nice. I remember that soldier, and it was a random conversation in a bus with someone. In a bus, he asked me where I'm from. I told him, and he said, "Oh, I just came from Islamabad last week." So he didn't know what Iraq and what Afghanistan. I'm not like saying something about him, but this is really, it's look like people here sometimes need to be kind of educated to know what happened in 2003. And also for us, we still, someone said, it was a common thing between Iraqi writers during the 2003 when we found ourselves, we have to write about about war in our fiction writing, in our poems, something to enlighten people or to describe what's going on. It says that it should be part of history, so we can digest what happened. So it's going to be ready for writing. Now it's too uncooked, or it's too very fresh to understand what happened during the last 10 years of the war or something. Now, 20 years later, we're still saying it's still fresh and not very ready to write or talk. But this looks like it's part of it. You say it's ongoing or unprocessed thing. I want to also say that one of the catastrophic things about war, it's also destroy the memory of a country, of people. It's reshape it, it's rewrite it, and it's a long process to talk about it. Yeah.
And it's carried in the suitcase.
Yeah.
You want to jump in?
I forgot the question.
Well, I mean, just reflect on the themes, motifs of home, belonging, displacement in your work, in your creative work, and maybe your own personal connection.
Maybe we can go to another question, because I think the three Iraqis
here great.
Answer that.
Great. Okay, so I think that maybe we can open up now to other questions from the audience, and please still stay seated, and the mic will come to you. Just raise your hand. Actually, as people are thinking through their questions, maybe I can turn to you and highlight another reflection that I had when I was listening to your reading about the the analogous analysis that you are making or highlighting between the quote unquote, bringing civilization or bringing democracy or whatnot in the context of the invasion and occupation, but also the deployment of the language of saving the holy sites and so forth in the context of the resistance. So I wonder if you want to reflect on that point, on the theme of religion, and that also of course connects to martyrdom, but.
I guess I'll just kind of veer off and say my own thing for a couple of minutes. Yesterday, Spencer Ackerman talked about a moment where he goes and they're serving crab legs or something. And, just not too long ago, another 2-decade-long war ended, the Afghanistan war. And, in Iran, we're having to deal with the detritus of that. I mean, I won't get into how difficult it's been, and I've written about resistant fighters since a year and a half ago who are now all dead, and just the sheer explosion of anger of the Afghan people vis-a-vis America is extraordinary. It transcends the Iraqi experience to my mind, actually. And I had translated an Afghan writer, and somebody said, you make it seem like this filmmaker who went, Afghan filmmaker who got some money to go make a documentary in Afghanistan, it was a scam. And I said, Afghanistan was a 2 decades long scam. It was a scam. The whole thing was a scam. And, that was one aspect of the thing I wanted to talk about. The other thing is, in regards to religion and what's happening in displacements vis-a-vis Iran, those geographies are very close to each other, right? There's not a long distance as the crow flies between Baghdad and Tehran, and all you have to do is come and see just the sheer numbers of Iraqis who come on pilgrimage to the Iranian holy sites and backwards. That back and forth is real. So when, like last week in the New York Times and Foreign Policy, they say the winner out of all this was Iran, it's bollocks, right? Like it wasn't Iran. It's like far more complicated than that. And the displacements that we talk about vis-a-vis Iraqis, Afghanistan, and all of these places affect the Iranians, affect the Iraqis, affect the Kurds, and also create these divisions within them. The Kurds are not all one uniform entity, and I could go on and on about it, but I wanted to see what all of this means as a writer, as an occasional journalist, as an educator, and I felt like all of these are somehow connected. When Kabul fell, and then just very conveniently Ukraine started, so everybody would forget about Afghanistan. So I did some work with the resistance in Afghanistan, and then I went to Ukraine. I wanted to understand, because I in the grand scheme of things, I think it's all part of the same thing, right? And in this country, all the magazines I read, all the people I follow, I mean, yesterday these distinguished guests talked about it really eloquently. The conversation not always is very reductive. They don't want to see the layers and layers and layers of things that exist. That in the book I talk about. Some guy might be bidding for an artwork in Doha or Dubai for $10 million, and the next day they're sending, another $10 million to northern Syria to support al-Nusra or whatever. It's just, in order to wrap your head around all of this, it's so complicated. You just need to put a whole lifetime into it, and nobody does here. Like very few people, like gentleman over there, for instance. And so for me, it's a pretty, I'm not hopeless about it, but, I feel the anger. I feel the anger of the Iraqis with whom I've spent much time, the Lebanese, the Syrians, the Afghans. And like as an Iranian in the middle of all this, most of the time I just walk around with guilt, right? It's like guilt is my big thing here. And the people who actually understand me most and my book and write to me and read the book most closely are believe it or not, American veterans, Marines, ex-Marines, Army captains, people like that. And, you know, they asked me, like, when Kabul fell, like, how do I come to terms with this? Was my life, and I've heard the same exact sentence from Iranians who were in the Iran-Iraq war for 8 years, and they'll say, so what did I just fought 8 years for nothing? And I don't know what to say, you know, it's just, these things are just so complicated, and for these people here, it's just so heartbreaking. And for me, I'm just like slightly on the outside looking in, kind of like you, and it's very difficult. I don't have answers, but I have sympathy.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I have 2 questions here and 3 over there, so okay. So yeah, we'll start with you and then with you, Spencer. And try to keep it short so that we can take all the questions.
Yeah, so my question is more about what you were saying with the glass tape on the window and kind of the safe room that you had created. What was it kind of more detailed like for everyday families who weren't, you know, fighting on the battlefront, but were still in their homes and they still had to go to work to get food, and children, like, how did you learn from each other about how to put the tape on the glass? Or how did, like, what was the community like giving advice to each other on what to do to try to keep as normal of a life as possible while still being completely chaos?
Let's take all 3 questions and then open up. So, Spencer.
I'd like to add. Can you hear me?
No.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'd like to ask the Iraqis on the panel, what should we call the war that we're here to commemorate? What do the Iraqis call it? What should we call it?
Great. And then we have Ibrahim Musa there in the back. Ibrahim, raise your hand.
Thank you very much. Very moved by your poetry and your work. What would your advice be? I mean, I'm a scholar of Islamic studies, and I teach in a policy school here, and I do history and religious studies. What would your advice be for academics and for people in universities of how to understand that? I'll tell you how I think about it. I try to tell, in the same way that Salah talked about this question, is that you must understand the complexity. And the only thing that Americans in policy schools or in Washington want is a policy. And the policy is how stupid you can make the question and how stupid the answer can be, right? They want one thing. And it's a level of frustration, but it seems that my colleagues, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it is Ukraine, whether it is Palestine, whether it's Iraq, is this level of simplicity. Am I wrong in the way I'm thinking? Maybe you can correct me.
Okay, great, thank you. So we have a question specific about the war, a question about how to call it and how to think about it and teach it, and especially in an academic scholarly space. So whoever wants to jump, I mean, Dunya, if you want to.
It was, well, that was, yeah, communities in Iraq, and I was living in Baghdad. As if it was something like not only that we talking to each other, but people understood from, like, for example, they suddenly, and the rumors were also very popular. Like, sometimes we didn't know if it was a rumor or reality, because a lot of things were said during the war. We were not sure, and sometimes rumors where they said part of the policy, that sometimes they said these rumors created by government for certain reason, some rumors created by people. Like, it was, for example, they suddenly said, oh, there'll be chemical weapons drones. So everybody, that room, there are other things that we did. For example, when we heard that chemical weapons, my mom put a tape on where? On the keyhole. So it's not gonna come through this hole, the chemical weapons. For example, we had the radio and batteries that time, so if it's suddenly something urgent, we hear it from the news. And it was, now I hear about it, it may sound strange to you, but that time made sense. And always there was shortage of something, eggs, no eggs suddenly, or something like there were. So everyone, I don't know how, we all knew the same.
They have experience, and they have their experience. Some improve them or develop them even as superstitious. Like we have some bad knowledge. I remember my father, whenever there is a alarming coming, and he put all of the family under the concrete stair or the concrete ladder, because when we go out, we see the ruined house. The only part that's still alive or still complete in the house is the stair. So he got the knowledge and put all the family under that. So I spent like long time in my life under that because they think it's safe. So they made their own policy or their own beliefs about experience. And someone said what we call the war. Well, Dr. Omar just gave me some. He said Bosch war. That's right. Yeah, Bosch war. Yeah, and it's funny. Even the generation who were like babies who was born in this war. I remember one of like 2 or 3 neighbors. They called their baby as a nickname. They called them Boshi. He's supposed to be the enemy during the Saddam war. I mean, I'm talking about 1991. So maybe it's not allowed to call your kid a boy, but people do that. We call them Boshi. Boshi. Yeah. But now, even if you use the very neutral term, like you said, we say the year of change, you are not referring to any, like you are not saying it's invading, it's wrong, or it's liberty or liberation, even though people could say, oh, you don't care, so you think it's like using very neutral words, so it's even this is risky. So let's keep it with no name, maybe.
No name.
Wow. It's difficult sometimes. But when it's in English, it's much less impact people. When you say someone who speaks Arabic and you say to him invasion or occupation, it's not. But it's still because the name is going to refer to your background. So that's why people are choosing to not define themselves by how we call the war. For me, I say invasion. Yeah. But this term was developing. It's not. It's a decision to make through years.
Yeah. And you want to jump in?
Yeah. As I told you when you wrote your article, that in the beginning of the invasion, if you dare to mention ihtilal, occupation, or muqawama, resistance, immediately you will be affiliated with Saddam and Ba'ath Party. And the Iraqi, unfortunately, some of them collaborated as informers with, as usually they collaborated before with the regime of the Ba'ath and Saddam. So immediately you will be, associated with terrorists, and you will be arrested and tortured. And many people whom I know, because my first dissertation, I studied also School of Law in University of London. So the first thesis was about legal system in Iraq and using torture during interrogation. So the testimony I collected from people, most of them, they were innocent. They have nothing to do with terrorists. Although, I mean, even the definition of terrorism, it's already, we have different perspective. And the war, we call it now, or even before, Suqut, the fall. So when you read the founder of Iraqi sociology, Dr. Ali al-Wardi, he wrote about the fall of the Ottoman Empire in 1917. And he called, people used at that time to call the generation born after the fall of the empire, Ottoman, they call it Awlad al-Suqut, the generation of the fall. So now when people Iraqi inside Iraq, because I'm living in Iraq more than in Europe. So they said Suqut, Sanat al-Suqut, the year of the fall of regime and the fall of Baghdad. Regarding to the question of one of the audience about how Iraqi cope with the war. The best book, in my opinion, published by Nuha Radi. Nuha Radi was a pioneering Iraqi artist, sculptor, and she published Baghdadi Diary for 1991. And this book got many recognition. She passed away, unfortunately, and the Spanish government, they named one of the street in Andalusia after her name. And this is one of the best book written daily, and it touched the life, the life of communities, how people cope and how they survive. It's a very interesting book. Yeah.
Thank you. And maybe, Salar, maybe if you want to address Ibrahim's question about the reductive, how to respond to kind of reductive approaches.
Honestly, I don't have a response to it. I don't think it's possible within the paradigm of this culture and this country. It's not possible.
I think empirical work, especially qualitative methodology, Iraq has, used to be till 1956, people, scholars, they went to Iraq before the fall of monarchy, and they did great work, empirical work. So if you know the language, of course, is very important, because knowing the language is knowing the culture is the key. In addition to what I noticed during my years in English academia, in University of London, that many textbooks in Arabic is not translated in English. Although many scholars, they took from those resources, and sometimes they never even mention them in their referencing. And for example, the 10 volumes of Ali Jawad, the historian Ali Jawad, Arab Before Islam. This is one of the great books if you want to know the culture and the history of Arab people before Islam. And regarding Iraqi history, of course, Abdurrazzaq al-Hassani, the historian, and the sociologist Ali al-Wardi, he used history in his analysis, and many other great books. Unfortunately, is not translated. So maybe you will make a new project for translation to bring in new stories and to fill the gap at least, and to have this constructive dialogue between Arabs or Iraqis in general and American.
This is really important, because what you point out to is kind of it's also about knowledge production, and it connects to power knowledge, Edward Said, et cetera, but what you are really reflecting on here is the extraction of knowledge, and the lack of citation, the ethics of citation, for example, and that also connects to the point about your point, Salar, about the paradigm, like thinking within that paradigm. If you want complexity, there is a need for a different kind of paradigm that really disrupts and maybe kind of even decolonize knowledge production, because the extractive production of knowledge that you were referring to is. It's predicated on colonialism.
In the 19th century, for instance, the British, they became highly knowledgeable of the Persianate world, also because of India as well. And, some great translations were done throughout the 19th century, and several generations of British historians and translators did some really important work, seminal work, but that did not contribute to a just approach to that world. All it contributes to, the understanding only contributes to further oppression, not to justice. So that's why
to classify and
the British did a fair amount they did like monumental work on the Persianate world because of their holdings in Asia, in India, and everywhere else, and of course the great game between Russia and Britain in the Iranian plateau. But all of that understanding, all of those books translated, it to my mind, it has never translated translated into something positive in the grand scheme of things. It's always actually been the other way around. Mm-hmm. And you only have to look at some of the heroes and heroines of that era and their travel writings and whatnot. They were in the service of the Her Majesty, right? And here, I guess they're in the service of the Langley or whatever. So I don't think that's I think it's overrated understanding. Just as I think like the greatest poetry cannot be translated. So I don't know. That's just my own 2 cents about this.
Okay, well, thank you. On this note, we'll bring it to conclusion, the conversation here, but hopefully we'll continue with the box lunches in the hallway. And so please join me in thanking our panelists.